Should I pray? We got people get now that the break's over, we're going to get our break time. It's all right. Hey, would you give a big welcome to my friend Kyle Dana?
Good morning. I want to first say thank you to the New York District for hosting this event, and as well as Pastor Will and Crystal for allowing us to use the church facilities. And I also thank Rick Ross for inviting me to come along. As he had said earlier, 25 years I've been spending my time devoted to helping pastors and ministry employees understand the importance of planning for the future. I really appreciated Rick's word this morning about pastors needing to have a plan and being good stewards so that your ministry can continue to thrive. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about in this first session today. So if you advance the slide, I'm going to tell you right out the gate what I am not, and then I'll tell you what I am. I am not a tax professional, and I'm not an attorney. But what I am is somebody who has been working 25 years in AG Financial, specializing in 403Bs, IRAs, 409 Cap As, 457s, 401Ks, and Rabbi Trusts. That's way too much information for one person to have in their head. So I'm going to try to communicate some of this to you today. Just to give you a little bit of background, I grew up in the AG. I, from the youngest of ages, have been a person who has gravitated toward money and investing. I'm of the generation that it was a child before the internet, so I can remember looking at the newspaper and seeing these stock symbols and fractions and just being mesmerized by what all this meant, this idea that I could put money into something and that money could grow and I didn't have to do anything while it was growing. I also grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, which is home of a gentleman by the name of Warren Buffett. In my early teenage years, became my teenage idol. So much like Raleigh, I am a nerd when it comes to retirement. That's something that I've loved, investing and finance and business. I went to Evangel University, and all my years in the Assemblies of God, I never knew that AG had their own financial services arm, if you advance it. And AG Financial, for those of you that do know, we are the only affiliated and endorsed retirement plan for the General Council of the Assemblies of God. That's not to say that there's not other retirement plans and other great financial institutions out there, but I will say there are some very unique benefits to a church plan, and that's what this 403B is. If we go on to the next slide, just a little bit of a recap on AG Financial. The entire AG Financial Services now manages over $10 billion, which for a Pentecostal denominational fund it's pretty amazing. Yeah, pretty amazing. And we also have around 66,000 total ministries, churches, and participant clients in our organization. So it is one of those things that I go to bed at night thinking about your retirement plans. I wake up in the morning thinking about your retirement plans, and I've found that over the years, my likability factor, for some reason, is tied to the direction of the stock market. So I have been a rock star all the way up until a couple weeks ago. And for whatever reason, you guys think that it's my fault, but I need you to know that I'm also invested, and I needed to go up as well. So I want to spend a couple minutes just testing our audience today. If you advance it a couple slides, on your retirement readiness. I want to ask you some true-false questions. I want to gauge what your level of knowledge is, and then as we go on throughout the day's conference and the breakouts, we'll go a little bit deeper in this. So I'm going to start off with a cartoon I think best encapsulates how I look at my job. A gentleman comes into his financial planner and he says, I retire on Friday. I haven't saved a dime. Here's your chance to become a legend. That's really what it feels like some days. If you go on to the next slide, this will be one of my only data slides that I'll show you. But about 10 years ago, I am a data person. I have found that facts are more important than feelings. And so at our organization, we go into every district as well as at the national level, and we look at all of our Assemblies of God ministers, and we look at what they have invested at AG Financial. That does not mean that they may not have money invested elsewhere, but this is the data that we have. And I pulled the New York, we update this every year. And what I really want to show you here is that if you see ministers 61 to 70 years old in New York District, the average retirement balance is around $90,000. Now, 61 to 70 is getting close to retirement. It's not typically retirement, but getting close. I want to ask you, how many of you think you can retire on $90,000? So this kind of illustrates what Rick was talking about. This is a big problem. Now, with the ministers in that 61 to 70 category, there's not much that I can say or do to change that course, but where I'm focusing my efforts is on those younger groups, because if we can, again, focusing on stewardship. I'm not going to be the person that's going to make you a better theologian, but I can help you and educate you on the stewardship part so that, pastors, you can and will have a period that you will retire. You will retire. Your retirement will look different and feel different, but you will retire, and you're going to need resources available to that. One more point on this slide that I think is important is the median, which we don't often talk about. And just so you know what that means is in that category of 61 to 70, the average balance is $90,000. The median means half of the ministers in that group have a balance of $20,000. So we have got to do more at a national level, at a district level, and at a church level. And that's why I appreciate this conference, not just being pastors, but also church board members and ministry leaders. So let's go through and do this money IQ quiz that I've put together for you. Again, it's true, false. Advance the slide twice. True or false? When I make more, I will save more. False. I would say in some cases, some of you would be true. But generally speaking, when you make more, you spend more. You have aspirations to save more, but it doesn't always execute that way. I love the book that came out a few years ago called The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. I think he really states it best is we don't always have control over our compensation or salary, but what you do have control over is your spending. Now, I know I'm going to say some things today that are unpopular, especially if husbands and wives are in here, but it has to be said. And I like what Morgan Housel says in his book, is that in order to spend less, you have to desire less. And in order to desire less, you have to stop caring what other people think. Now, in the ministry world, we tend to say, well, I don't care what other people think. But when it comes to money, money's a very powerful thing. And I see it all the time, all different age groups. And it is not that different how money is handled in the church world and in the outside church world. But I think we have the opportunity to really show the outside church world how to be good stewards of money. The second question, true or false, my expenses will decrease in retirement. If you advance the slide. I'm getting a mixed bag on that one. What would you guess that your largest expense will be when you retire? Healthcare, right? Some of your expenses may decrease, but others of your will increase. And healthcare is also the most unpredictable expense because you don't know between, if you're married, you and a spouse, everything may be great in your 70s, into your 80s, but then in that late 80s, something could happen. And that healthcare expenses are really add up quickly. So when I look at this question, I would say that your expenses from a planning standpoint, you should plan on your expenses being relatively the same before retirement and in retirement as they are before retirement, or possibly going up. It's better to plan for the worst case scenario than to expect it not to happen. So the next question, true or false? and this is one of my favorite comments and questions I get over my 25 years. I will be able to live off the interest of my savings or investments. Well, if you have $5 million in the bank earning 2 or 3%, you might be able to have a comfortable living. But for the reality for most people is you're not going to be able to live off your earnings. If the average retirement balance for a New York minister is around $90,000, you're not going to be able to live off just the earnings. You're going to dip in. The whole point of what we're talking about today is saving enough so that you can start drawing it in retirement, and that will last at least for the second to die. Statistically, women live longer. So don't build a plan that just says, as long as I'm here, we're taken care of. The rest of it, you figure out. That won't go well. You need to plan that you have enough for the second to die. The next question, true or false? The average annual return for the stock market is 12%. What? This one we're going to actually go a little deeper this afternoon in our second breakout, because this has been a really fun topic, especially since COVID happened. Getting a lot more phone calls about people trying and wanting to understand a little bit more about investing. So this actually comes from Dave Ramsey, because I do get these questions when people go through Financial Peace and these programs. It is a true stat. The average annual return of the stock market between the last 95 to 100 years is about 12%. The problem I have with this is that from an expectation standpoint, how many of you are going to be invested in the stock market for 95 to 100 years and 100% stocks? So the problem is that when this gets out, people get their statements every quarter. They call me and they say, Kyle, I'm supposed to be averaging 12%. That's what Dave Ramsey tells me. Why am I not doing that? Because you didn't have the right expectations, okay? There are periods of time, the last 2 years, 2023, 2024, back to back, the market did just over 25% each year. But is that fair to say that the average annual return of the stock market is 25%? No. I'm going to give you some stock predictions this afternoon that I think you can take to the bank, but I'm going to make you come to my session to know what those are. The last true-false question, I will never retire. And go ahead and advance it one more. And we'll go ahead one more slide. Pastors, this is the cover of Time magazine not so long ago, but I like the image, but I like the title. Will you ever be able to retire? And what I like about the image is in the last 20 years, our landscape in America has changed greatly. 20 years ago, you walk into a fast food restaurant, and it was typically teenagers all working behind the counter. And today you walk in, and it's not uncommon to see the baby boomer generation continuing to work. I am a believer that working is healthy, that the longer you work, the healthier you are. That's been proven scientifically. I also know in our world, in the ministry world, when you have a calling on your life, it's not just hanging up the hat. You will continue on in some capacity. But what you will find is that some of you will transition from full-time to part-time to no time. And I would love to tell you that when you hit that no time category, that your utility company will send you a birthday card and tell you that the rest are on the house, right? You will have expenses that will continue on. This is not about winning the lottery and accumulating millions and millions of dollars. This is about saving today so that you can pay your bills in the future when that income is less or gone. That's what retirement planning is. So for today, the solution that I wanted to bring to your attention is the 403B retirement plan. I know many of you in here are probably familiar with the 403B or have the 403B plan. A few of the things I want to note, it is what we call an employer-sponsored plan. Very similar to a 401k, but 403Bs are used in the nonprofit world. So typically churches, schools, and hospitals use 403B plans. A 403B plan is adopted by the church or the ministry, and it can be customized however you want. One of the things that's very unique in the church world versus the for-profit world is you can design these things however works for your ministry and your ministry's budget. In the for-profit world, if you're going to offer a match or anything, you typically have to do it across the board. In a church world, you may not have the budget. You'd love to do that, but you may only have the budget to be able to do something for pastor. You can do it that way, and you can change it and modify it as you go. So it's easy to customize. This third bullet, I expect some amens on this, retired minister's housing allowance. Remember when Rick was talking about your compensation package and housing allowance during your working years, helping you to save on taxes? Well, get this. When you save for retirement in your denominational retirement plan and you retire, ministers, you can pull money out of your retirement plan as a housing allowance when you're no longer working. I'm getting it from the first table. That's a huge benefit. Remember when we're talking about extending the longevity of this money for the second to die? You will have housing-related expenses in retirement. Even if your home is paid in full, you're still going to have property taxes, you're still going to have homeowners insurance, you're still going to have upkeep and maintenance. So if you're pulling money out, if you're pulling $25,000 a year out of retirement and $12,000 of that is housing eligible, half of your distribution you don't have to pay taxes on. That is a huge benefit. If you go invest at Edward Jones, Fidelity, Vanguard, T. Rowe Price, all great companies, they don't care if you're a minister or not. They can't do that for you. So those are some of the unique benefits that your denominational retirement plan has different from other investments out there. If you change it to the next slide, inside of our plan, something that I have had the privilege of working closely with our mutual funds over the last few years, serving on the board, but we offer faith-based investments. So in our mutual fund investments, we screen out alcohol, tobacco, gambling, pornography, and abortion. We have, for those of you that didn't say it, we do have non-faith-based investments. I'm not here to tell you and legislate morality. You pick and choose whatever you want. But I just think that's something that's very important and nice, that you can invest and participate in the stock market, but know that you're not invested or owning any of those companies that contradict your beliefs. If you go to Fidelity and invest in their mutual fund and look through their few hundred companies they own and call them and say, look, there's a handful of these I need to talk to you about, they don't care. They don't care. It's only performance driven. We're about performance, but also representing our faith. And if you saw the news headline this morning, Trump has threatened 200% tariffs on European alcohol. So maybe we'll see alcohol consumption beginning to drop. So, but it does impact these things out there. Those types of companies do make money. Those types of companies are represented in a lot of mutual funds. Most of us, every day, we're not sitting there going through or have the time or the knowledge to go through and look to see. So this is a nice aspect in our denominational retirement plan. We offer both pre-tax and Roth options. So again, everybody's in a unique circumstance. Some of you need a tax deduction today, pay taxes on it later. Some of you would rather pay taxes today and have it come out tax-free in retirement, and then you layer on that retired housing allowance, and it even gets more interesting. But all of these options are available, and again, you can choose and customize how it works best for you. And then the last one, again, I just want to emphasize, and I appreciate Rick saying this in his presentation, but church board members, if your church or ministry is not doing something for your pastor, for your pastors, or for your staff, I want you to call me or email me, and I want to have a conversation with you to see how we can be of assistance. I love what Rick proposed with the match. I'm a believer in the match because I think that you need to put some skin in the game. You need to learn the discipline of putting something in, and then your church can put something in as well. I have some ministries that they don't require the pastor to put anything in. They just put a set amount in for the pastor. That's even better, but I need that pastor to build a discipline too, so if they do go to a different church, they know that that's a priority that they need to save. But however you want to structure it, it's imperative that you're doing something. Take care of your pastors. And from a stewardship and a financial standpoint, be sure that you're prioritizing and thinking about that. I've talked to a lot of board members, and one that really surprised me, but now it kind of makes sense, is all these board meetings they sit in, and he said, Kyle, I work in the for-profit, and I have a 401k, and I save in my 401k, and I get matches in my 401k, and I just never thought about that for the church. I just never thought pastor never brought it up. Pastor never talks about his compensation, about any of these things, because pastors, how many of you love talking to your board about your own benefits package, right? That's where AG Financial can come in. We can be an advocate. We can help. If you don't want to have that conversation, you can point your church treasurer or board member to contact us, and we can help them understand how to do it, what's needed to do it, and maybe even churches of that similar size, what other ones are doing, just so there's some kind of benchmark. But please do something. Pastors, it's not just your church. You can't blame your church if you don't have enough for retirement, because you have to take action as well. And I have often said that pastors, how you handle your own personal finances is indicative of how you're going to handle the church's finances. So if you're not taking care of your own finances and being a good steward of your own resources, chances are when you look into the church's finances, you're going to see a lot of the similar patterns. So I know that's not a popular thing to say, but it is the reality of what we see out there. So again, AG Financial, we want to help you prioritize this. There's a lot of other things out there financially that we tend to put at the top of the list before retirement. But I really want you to try to think about that retirement expense as yet another bill you have to pay every month. Whether it's $50 or $100 or $200, whatever it is, start with what you can and gradually increase it. And again, as I said, we'll go a little bit deeper into these topics this afternoon in that second breakout. But with that being said, I'm going to turn it back over to Raleigh. I saved a little time.
Thank you, Kyle. So good. Kyle wasn't available, so one day I was talking to a group of pastors about retirement. And that one data slide that shows that some of our pastors aren't ready for retirement yet, I was talking about that. And I said, because they had the expectation, we're not ready for retirement because we had the expectation that Jesus would return soon. And so we weren't saving for retirement. And so I confidently exclaimed, and we all know Jesus isn't returning. And so that's not what I meant to say. I meant he hasn't returned, so they don't let me do that session anymore, which is why we have Kyle. All right, my session, what you don't know can hurt you. I feel like I'm the one that's supposed to scare you every time I speak. So let me see who's in the room. Raise your hand if you're a pastor. Good number, thank you. Raise your hand if you're a board member. Good. If you're the treasurer of the board, thank you. You're an officer. Bookkeeper. Wonderful. Anyone else? Any other volunteer in the church? Good. Thank you. Thank you for what you do, involved in managing the finances of the church. I am my church's treasurer. So I've been on church boards a couple of times. What was funny about this time was I wasn't even in the room when they elected me. I know, let's get Raleigh to do it. So I am the church treasurer. But funny enough, that's not the first time that's happened to me. It happened somewhere else too. Elected treasurer, and I wasn't even in the room. So I've learned a lot. My first time I became a board member, I did it all wrong. God taught me two things that first time that has helped me become a better board member. Pray for my pastor and care for the business of ministry. I could talk a whole session on what I thought the role of a board member was. I thought it was my job to tell pastor how he was doing ministry wrong. God had fun with me. I tell my wife, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to tell him. And I get in the board meeting and God said, don't speak. And he would never let me speak because I was just going to say something wrong. Finally, he taught me, he trained me. I prayed for my pastor. Pastor and I had a great relationship. Then when God said, okay, speak, I realized I had nothing to say. That's a whole lesson there. But God did, I said, well, then what am I here for, God? And he said, I need you to care about the business of ministry. And so many years of experience is kind of bring me here to today to talk about our role as leaders, board members, and other leaders in the church, how we're going to care for the business of ministry. And you might not realize some of our legal and fiduciary responsibilities when we said yes to volunteering on the board or being voluntold to be part of the board. So, we may not have realized, but you're probably soon realizing that we're involved in strategic planning, financial management and oversight. We have to maintain key documents and policies. We have to care about risk management or avoiding risk. And we have to comply with our internal policies, our constitution and bylaws, state laws, federal laws. There's a lot to being a leader in the church. And so if I ask you today, are you prepared to be a leader? Many of you will say yes. I don't want to see the hands. But let me challenge you through this session to see if we really are prepared. Now, some of you might also say, this is scary. I already know some of these responsibilities, and I don't know that I can do it. But here's what Proverbs tells us, 11:14. In the multitude of counselors, there is safety. Another version says there is wisdom. So together as a team, God has you part of that team to be that counseling team because there's wisdom there and there's safety. So you're not in it alone, and together we can help run the church and care about the business. All right. So let's just start off fun. Let's find out why churches end up in court. Here's the top 5 reasons that churches end up in court. Next slide. Just for a random 5-year period, you can see some of the reasons that churches end up in court. The top 3 that are always kind of bubbling up to the top: sexual abuse of a minor. We certainly have heard a lot of that in the news. Property disputes and personal injury claims. Slip and falls. Someone hurts their back at work. Property disputes. I was in a church that we were growing, but our parking lot wasn't big enough, so the cars were parked on the street, and neighbors were mad at the church, because we had all these cars parking on the street. Property disputes, things like that. And then sexual abuse of a minor is certainly on all of our minds because it's making the news, and that insurance video even talked about it. So churches can end up in court. Now, the next slide shows us even a broader list of some of these legal risks for churches. And the top 4 all start with the word negligent. Say negligent. The way we hire our staff, the way we retain our staff, the way we supervise our staff. Well, if we're doing it negligently, we can end up in lawsuits. Failure to report child abuse, mandatory reporting laws. I don't know that we're going to talk about that today, but many states, church leaders are mandatory reporters. Do you know what your state requires? Security law violations, and maybe low risk to many of our churches, but it does happen. Violation of employment laws, not understanding what employment laws are. I'm going to talk about some of that. And then exerting undue influence in estate matters. When someone leaves the church, church is part of the will. Families sometimes can test that. So, not every church ends up in court, and that can be rare. But it does show the importance of us of doing due diligence and care when we're acting in our official capacity as a church leader. So churches end up in court. There's some ways that we can end up in court, but do you know that you can be personally held responsible? As a board member, you can be susceptible to fines and penalties also. Look at this list. A lot of different ways, risk areas that you can be named in the suit, and then you might have to personally pay. And I've got some case studies of where that's happened. Can't talk about all of them, but I've highlighted the two that talk about fiduciary responsibilities. And we're going to talk about what that means for all of us. So, kind of scared you, right? But here's the good news. In most states, when we're volunteers on the board, we have some protections. And that's what this next slide talks about. We are immunized as unpaid board members. You often wondered why you weren't paid. Well, this is that one perk. You now have less liability for ordinary negligence. So if you make the wrong decision, you're not going to be personally held responsible if you did your due diligence and care. The courts would call that ordinary negligence. You did your best, but still something bad. You replaced the light bulb in the stairwell, but someone still tripped and fell. You did your best. But if you didn't replace the light bulb and you didn't tighten the handrail, that might be a gross negligence, right? You knew better and you still didn't do it. All right, the difference. So if we're doing our best, we can be avoid some liability. Similarly, our volunteers in the church, there's some laws already on the books that protect us as volunteers in the church. If we're just doing our best and we're following the church's internal policies and procedures, then we're not in trouble if someone slips and falls. But they also say, though, if you're like a lifeguard and your state requires lifeguards to be certified, your volunteers should be certified if they're going to be a lifeguard. There's things like that. But in general cases, because you're a volunteer, you have less liability. Now, here's 3 case studies that go along with this slide on when board members were personally liable. Okay, so watch this. First one here is in New York. A nonprofit board was accused of gross negligence, not ordinary, but gross negligence, and they were fined $5.5 million. The Attorney General sued the nonprofit. The board did not look at conflict of interest cases and excess compensation. So the Attorney General said you should know better. There's too many conflicts. You overpaid, and now you're personally responsible for $5.5 million. And the board was part of that. The president and the board had to pay that. Another church, the board members were sued because they failed to provide or enforce their sex offender policy. They had a sex offender policy. There was a sex offender that was attending the church, and they didn't follow their own policy. So the board was sued and named in the lawsuit for failing to keep people safe. And the last one, the Attorney General of California sued a nonprofit and their board members for improperly using restricted funds, right? We care about using our restricted funds appropriately for their intended purpose. The Attorney General argued that the board members failed in their duty to act in good faith and make reasonable inquiry about how the president was using the restricted funds. So there are cases. I have another story where a church in Florida was withholding payroll taxes from the staff, but they didn't send them on to the IRS. because they had to make ends meet. They were using it for operating expenses. The board knew about it. The board wrote it down in minutes. We still haven't paid the taxes. We should do something about it. It doesn't take the IRS very long to know when they're not getting their taxes. So they came in, they put liens on the church, $400,000. The church had to close the church school to, immediately get some money and pay off the liens. And so that board was at risk because they knew better. All right, so that gets us to what I call fiduciary duties. In the state, your church is organized in your state. The state puts upon you some of these responsibilities. The state gives you the permission to be organized as an entity. And there are you may not realize that some of those responsibilities that come by being a corporation in your state. Here are 3 of them, the fiduciary responsibilities that all boards have, the church governance has. The duty of loyalty. Number 1, the duty of loyalty. A board member should not put his or her interests ahead of the organization. The church comes first. You're a person, you've got a lawn care business, your wife is a wedding coordinator, you've got a construction company. The church needs all of that, but the church's interests come first. So that's why we have conflict of interest policies. We say that we will, when there's a personal relationship involved in church business, I will abstain from discussion and or vote. I'll let the rest of the board members decide if that's a good decision for the church. We may hire your lawn care. We may hire your wife as wedding coordinator. We might hire your construction company. But you have to let other people make that decision, not you, right? So the duty of loyalty, you put the church's interest when you're operating on the board ahead of your own personal interests. The duty of care, you must act in good faith in the best interest of the organization and exhibit reasonable inquiry, skill, and diligence. We must exhibit reasonable inquiry, skill, and diligence. So that means we have to show up. That means we have to ask questions. We have to try to understand the financial report. We can't just rubber stamp what everyone else thinks is a good idea. We actually just have to talk about it, discuss it, and be part of the decision making. That's why some of those case studies that we saw, the board members got in trouble because they didn't exhibit that reasonable skill, inquiry, and due diligence, right? So that's part of your fiduciary duty. And then last is the duty of obedience. You must know and obey your internal documents, your governing documents, your state regulations, and your federal regulations. So we're talking about payroll, we're talking about IRS, we're talking about employment, we're talking about your own constitution and bylaws. You have to make sure that you're abiding by all of these internal and external rules. And I think this is the least understood role of boards, our fiduciary duties. All right, so I'm going to talk about some of those required forms and responsibilities now in the next few slides. So the duty of obedience says we have to follow our internal and external documents. So take a look at this list, your required forms and reports. Are you familiar with all of these? Have you read them? Are you sure that when you vote in accordance with some of your internal documents? You have financial reports, sure. Do you have an updated list of members? Do you have your insurance policy? Do you know where it's at? Do you know now that we should keep our insurance policies even though they're expired? Forever? Forever. You do need to find that insurance policy from 1970 in case you ever get sued. Do you know where you keep your permanent files? We talk about 3 years to 7 years, but there are some things that you have to keep forever. So, are you familiar with those documents? Those are the 3 questions you need to ask. Am I familiar? Do I know where they are? And have we overlooked any of these documents when we're making business decisions? Next, what records are required? The state, when you file as a corporation, generally all states follow the same general guidance, the template, and these are the required forms that every organization has to have. You have to have a complete books, complete records, financial accounts. You got to keep minutes of your members, minutes of your boards of directors, your resolutions, and a current list of voting members. And it's important to keep these up to date. It's important to make them accurate, and it's important to maintain them. These would be mostly permanent, all right? So, are you doing that at your organization? As a board member, a leader of the leadership team, it's your responsibility to make sure you're compliant with these. Okay, the next thing that could help us is having policies and procedures. Policies and procedures just help us, again, helps us understand our expectations, helps everyone stay on the same page, helps our memories stay fresh when we tend to forget things, and can make sure that when there's transitions, we still know the rules that we should be following. The next slide shows 12 different policies that you should start with. If you don't know where to start, just take the first one and start documenting your policies. I think I did that. So the next slide. Here is a list of your suggested policies. And remember, these PowerPoints are in, that non-working resource page. I'm sorry. I'll pause here just for a second. You can take a picture. All right. Moving on to understanding federal and state laws. Here are some of the employment laws that our churches have to comply with. Tax reform, immigration reform, Volunteer Protection Act, American with Disabilities, the Fair Labor Standards Act. And go on to the next slide. My second page of the employment laws, Equal Pay Act, Civil Rights Act, Age Discrimination, OSHA, Family Medical Leave, Privacy Policy. Okay, who has read all of those? There is a handout on that non-working website that describes all of these, kind of gives you a little synopsis of what it is and how it applies to your church. Now, many of them are required for any church. Some of them are required only if you have 15 employees or more. Some are only if you have 20 employees or more. One is 50 employees or more. But generally, even if you're too small for all of these rules, it's certainly a best practice to follow these. And so it means you've got to treat people fairly. You've got to make them have a safe working environment, right? Equal pay, no matter male or female, equal pay for the same job. I was in the middle of a board meeting once, and the male children's pastor was leaving, and they were getting ready to hire a female children's pastor. This is many years ago, and again, I didn't know right from wrong. And the conversation turned and said, well, she's married, so we can pay her less. And let's hire her because it will be cheaper to the budget, even though she was going to do the same job as the male children's pastor that left. That's illegal. Yeah, equal pay. Age discrimination, you can't discriminate people over age 40. That's old age. Did you know that? 40. So if you're hiring a youth pastor and you got a 60-year-old that applies, you just can't automatically write them off you've got to let them go through the interview. So take a look at these handouts on the website. Next, these employment laws also inform us how we hire potential people. And so there's another handout that talks about when we interview, there's the right way to ask a question, and there's an illegal way to ask questions. And I always just like to highlight these because I know we've all asked these questions. We've all asked these illegal questions. But it opens yourself up to lawsuits, discrimination type lawsuits, when you don't hire these people. And you might have asked questions like, are you married? Are you pregnant? What's the matter with your foot? You can't ask questions like that. Aren't you too old? When are you going to retire? You can't ask questions like that. It's kind of funny for you all, but I was on the board that had to handle 16 discrimination lawsuits because management, who we trusted to do things right, treated people unfairly. And so that's not a fun thing. All right, so there's right ways to do things, there's wrong ways to do things. Let's inform ourselves, let's educate ourselves so that we can always do better. Okay. Next slide. So you're probably saying, Raleigh, even in a multitude of counsels, there's wisdom. I still think we don't have all the expertise in our board. That's all right. Let's just always know when there's always an appropriate time to go out and get an expert to help us. And maybe here is a list of 10 when you might feel like if any of these come up in your business discussions, it might be an appropriate time to ask for expert help, right? Bylaws, updating bylaws, IRS, certainly child abuse concerns, employment issues. So, how do we find a good lawyer? Ask around for other churches. Which lawyers are they using? Certainly call the district, find out if there's a recommended lawyer. And you might not have one lawyer for all of these issues. You'll need an HR expert to help you just make sure you're complying with employment issues. You might need the Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF, for religious freedom issues. All right, and so ADF has a program and the network is part of that, where they'll, for a small fee, it's kind of like having ADF on retainer. And they'll answer your questions. And it is reasonable, because it's based on church size, to sliding scale. So religious freedom issues, they're your expert there. And there might be some other reasons to hire a different type of lawyer for some of these other issues. All right, so kind of wrapping it up with this last slide. What do I do now? Raleigh, I don't know that we're familiar with anything that you just said today. What's our next steps? And you can't quit. That's not the answer. I do not see resign on this slide. So, be familiar with your own internal documents. Read over your Constitution and bylaws. Make sure, at least in your business meetings, you're following that. And at your next annual business meeting, that you follow that appropriately. Then look at your policies and procedures. Do you have any? Start documenting with a few of the things that are important, like how do we spend money? How do we turn in receipts? How are we accountable to each other? And then maybe we're going to document our compensation package. What's it look like to have a healthy compensation plan? Maybe we need to have a conflict of interest policy so that we're aware we need to bring up potential conflicts so that we can let the rest of the board make decisions. We need to know when to ask for help. So after you've done all of these, know that there may be an appropriate time for ask for help. And maybe even reach out to a lawyer now and say, hey, if I ever have questions about HR, can I contact you? have them ready just in case you ever need them. All right, so I've given you a lot to think about. Here's the 3 questions for you to just kind of think about. Does our church leadership team act with loyalty and put the interests of the church ahead of our own? That's the fiduciary duty number 1. Does our church leadership team perform their duties in good faith and in the best interest of the organization? And then lastly, does our church leadership team have adequate information and perform due diligence to preclude negligent activity? And I'll just end it there. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Great job. Before the video, the church can make a difference that a secular can't based on our religious beliefs. Could you just talk to that a little bit on our hiring?
The discrimination law, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, says we cannot discriminate in employment decisions on the basis of race, color, origin, sex, or religion. And you're asking me if we can, or what is the exemption for churches. But religious employers are allowed to hire and fire based on religious matters. And we can have a doctrinal belief statement that they have to adhere to, and we can also have a code of conduct that they have to adhere to. So we do have that exemption, that religious freedom exemption. And so that's why it's kind of important to talk to ADF and see if you have a good, robust, documented policy that says we have a statement of belief, and we're adding our statement on sexuality, we're adding a statement on marriage. You need to have something in writing so that you can. There's a question I might have you wait and ask it at the Q&A so that we can do that. And then you can have a code of conduct so that once you hire them, they have to follow that. And you'll throw in some of your beliefs and practices, and you have to show up to church. You abstain from. The reason we have itemized receipts, so we know what you're eating and drinking, so that we can know that you're complying with our code of conduct. All right, now, let's watch this video on church bookkeeping.
Hi, my name is Steph Politis, and I'm here to talk to you today about what churches can do to make sure that their bookkeeping and their accounting is just on track. So after nearly 20 years of being an internal auditor and working with churches and not-for-profits, I have seen all sorts of church bookkeeping systems. I have seen all sorts of church bookkeepers, and I've seen all sorts of structures, some that work great, some that don't work great, some that lend themselves to being stolen from, some that lend themselves to having beautiful reports. And so what I want to offer you today is I want to offer you 4 mistakes that I commonly see from church bookkeeping. And then just to keep things exciting, I also want to offer 2 mistakes that pastors frequently make when it comes to talking about the church finances. So let's jump right in. So mistake number 1 is not going to surprise anybody. And for the church bookkeepers in the room, you need to know that, even if no one has said this to your face, they're all thinking it. And that's church bookkeepers, church accountants, tend to make things too difficult. Now, I'm not going to pick on you because I'm one of you, and I understand that being a nerd like I am, nothing just makes my heart beat faster than a really well-devised form with lots of boxes to check and places to sign and things to date. I mean, is there anything more exciting, right? But sometimes for the rest of the people around us, the thought of filling out that form one more time or coming to you with a receipt and a form and being told, well, I would prefer you use the red form because it's going to help you better, just kind of makes people a little bit bonkers. And so church bookkeepers, what we need to remember is not what we're doing, but why we're doing it. So maybe not the process that's important, but it's the purpose behind the process. And so all of those forms that we're having people fill out are basically trying to accomplish 3 things. The first one is we're trying to show what it is that we're looking at. So whether that's turning in a receipt or having a check, taking a copy of a check for a donation, we need whatever it is that the source document. The second one is we need to know what's it for. So when we get a receipt from the youth pastor, okay, what was it for? How do I need to code this in my accounting software? And the final thing is the approval. Who said and approved that they could spend what they said that they spent? And who's going to approve that? How are we going to get that initials? So those three things are the most important things that we need, but the process can be really flexible. Can you still use your form? Absolutely. Everybody loves a good form. But sometimes if you really need it to be, can we run the process by email? Can we attach a receipt to an email and copy the pastor and the bookkeeper, and the person can tell them where it's supposed to be charged to, and the pastor can reply all approved? Sure, that works. It accomplishes the three things. We can print all of those pieces off, or just save them in a file if we're a little more techie. And so it still accomplishes the three things without being just a bog down and kind of slow us down a little bit. So church bookkeepers, that one was kind of painless, right? Number one, we're gonna stop being so difficult, okay? So number two, the second thing that we can do, church bookkeepers and accountants, and I know that this is just gonna sound like I just am repeating myself, but backwards. Could you just make things less easy? I know, I'm really hard to please. So the first one was quit being so difficult, and the next one is make things less easy. Let me explain it to you. So most church bookkeepers want to make the life of the people around them work smooth. They want their systems to work great. In fact, I was just chatting earlier this year with a church that I work with and asking their accountant person how they run their process. And it's a busy multi-site facility church, so they have lots of campuses, lots of pastors, lots of things going on. And so she wanted to keep things easy for the ministers around her. And so what she did was she just kept accepting responsibilities back onto her plate. So sure, they were gonna give her the receipts and then she would fill out the forms. Okay, so then she would enter the checks. That's not a problem. Well, they couldn't find somebody to approve what the expense was for. So she would approve the expense. Okay, well then there was no one around to print the checks, so she would print the checks. And then, of course, those checks need to be signed to be valid, and there's nobody there because it's multi-campus, so she would sign the checks. Now, for many of you in the room, you're like, ugh, you're starting to feel that ick in the inside the same way that I was. Guys, her heart was right. Her heart was to go ahead and to make things easier for the people around her. But the method is not great, because what's going to happen then is it just exposes her to all of the risk. When she's the only person or he's the only person involved in every part of the process, the only person that can go down if something isn't right or doesn't go right is her. That's dangerous. So bookkeeper, I know that you want to make the life of the people around you easier, but you can't make it so easy at your expense. You have to be careful. So now I'm going to pick on our pastor for just a minute. Pastor, you've got to protect your bookkeeper. And I know that you have read all the same leadership books that I have read that talk about paying the money and hiring the competent people so that you don't have to be involved and trusting them to go in their gifting. All of that is correct. And does the bookkeeper need you to stand over her shoulder while she hits the buttons to enter in the payments? No, she or he does not need you to do that. But there are things that you need to do as the pastor, as the ministry head, that provide protection for your bookkeeper. I love that verse in the Bible that talks about how God's yoke is easy and his burden is light. But you'll notice he doesn't say, you don't even need to bother about my yoke. Chalk it off to the side, give it to somebody who you're paying money to be competent, and you don't worry about it. That's not how that verse goes. You still wear the yoke. You still do your job. So pastor, your job is to provide that approval letter for your bookkeeper to say, yes, when the checks are run, I'm going to sign the checks. I'm going to look through each one of them. If I see that something that doesn't look quite right, I'm going to ask about it. And not because you don't trust your bookkeeper, trust your accountant. You certainly do. But the reason that you're following up is because when an accusation comes, either against you or against that accountant, you're going to be the one who has to stand in that place first. And by standing back and saying, well, I just let them do their thing, I don't know anything about it, as my kids would say, that's dog water. That is not doing your job. Your job is to provide the protection while they do the day and day ins and out work of making the bookkeeping look great, making the accounting stuff be fantastic. So to recap, bookkeeper, accountant, your job is to not make things so easy that you open yourself up to liability. And pastor, your job is to make sure that you provide the headship that bookkeeper needs to not be totally exposed. All right, now that I've picked on everybody equally, I'm gonna get to one that is just gonna make some of the bookkeepers in the room want to just climb under their chairs. And it's 2 words. And just hang on a second, it's not as bad as you think. It's bank reconciliation. Now, guys, I have a great family. I love them dearly. Outside of my family and eating really good food, there's two things that I just love in this world, and it is college football and a bank reconciliation. And I know that sounds weird, but the truth is the bank reconciliation is like the Swiss Army knife to MacGyver. It does so many things and offers so many protections for the church and for the church accountant that it's crazy to me that church accountants wouldn't be super excited and as jazzed about the bank reconciliation as I am. But I also get it. I get it that the bank reconciliation doesn't have a deadline. It's not screaming at you to pay the paychecks. It's not a bill that's 10 days away from being past due. There's nothing urgent about the bank reconciliation. So then why do we need to do it? Well, let me explain it this way. So I have 4 kids, and they're all in the doing stuff ages. So I've got a junior all the way down to a 5th grader. And everybody plays sports or does drama or is in youth group. We all do the things, which means I spend a lot of my life sitting in my van, waiting for my kids to come out of buildings, or sitting in my stands, watching kids do what they're amazing at, which I love, super fun stage. But because of that, every mom out there will tell you, we lose things. Every day we lose something. There's a sock missing, there's a folder missing, there's a form missing. We can't find what we need. My first question is always exactly the same when something comes up as missing. And you know the question I'm going to ask. It's, where was the last place you saw it? And the reason is because we're all over the place. I have a house, everybody's got a bedroom, we've got a car, we've got my daughter's car, we've been to the church, we've been to the soccer game, we've been everywhere. So I need to narrow down the search of where we're looking for the one random sock. I've got to know. I can't look all of the places. I need to know where we look. And guys, that's the first thing that the bank reconciliation does that is so helpful, is it helps to narrow down the margin. Now, guys, my mom is not an accountant. She is, in fact, a dental hygienist. And back a million years ago, when balancing your checkbook was literally a checkbook that you flipped the pages up, she gave me a piece of advice that has stuck with me a million years, though I don't even reconcile a regular paper checkbook anymore. But the memory has stuck with me, and so I want to give it to you. When she would reconcile her checkbook, she would take a pencil and she would draw a line under the last place where it was reconciled, so that she knew if she had to find a problem, the problem had to be between the line and what was below it, all of the new stuff. And that is what a bank reconciliation does for you, is it provides that line in the sand of saying, everything from this point forward we know is where the error could be, because everything behind it we know is good. It reconciled to the bank. So that's why I love that bank reconciliation. It means you don't have to look for the sock at the soccer field. You get to look for the sock in the bedroom. It defines where we're starting at. So that's helpful. The other thing, and Pastor, I'm going to give you this heads up so that you know, the other thing that the bank reconciliation is so beneficial for is if there is fraud happening at a church, and I hate it, but there is fraud happening at churches. If there is fraud happening at church, one of the easiest places to find it is the bank reconciliation. So if you, church bookkeeper, have an accounting staff of several people, and maybe your job is on the end point of checks, so maybe somebody else enters them, somebody else prints them, and you see them at the end, that bank reconciliation should be your lifeline, that you're flipping through and you're looking at those canceled checks every single month. Pastor, you should be asking, hey, how'd the bank reconciliation look? Oh, do you want me to look at the canceled checks? How about those electronic payments that you're putting through? How do you know, Pastor, that the electronic payment going through is getting a signature? Because most of them aren't, because everything is so efficient these days. That bank reconciliation is going to show you of, hey, here's a list of all of the electronic payments that went through. Do those look right? Do those seem reasonable? Here's all the checks that we wrote. Do those make sense? Is the amount seem like something that we would do? It's just that last stop where you can double check and make sure that everything looks good. So the bank reconciliation is great for the pastor. It's great for the accountant. And accountant, let me give you one more hint. I recommend that you have a buddy look over your bank reconciliation every month. It doesn't even need to be someone in your church. Now, I would recommend you run it by your pastor first, but it can be an accountant from a different church. Say, hey, you check my bank and reconciliation every month, and I'm going to check yours. Because that's last stop to keep you safe against any allegation, that they can look and they're allowed to ask any questions of you, and you look at theirs and you're allowed to ask any questions. And that provides you a safety, that fun bank reconciliation. And if you want, I will write you a poem about it and send it to you, because it's just such a wonderful thing, that bank reconciliation. But let's get to our fourth point. Our fourth mistake that I commonly see bookkeepers make, and I promised you one for the pastor too, and it'll come here, another one for the pastor too, and it'll come here, and that is knowing your role. So let me put it like this. Church bookkeepers, I know that we're not the most adventurous, life risk-taking kind of people, but have you ever ridden on the front of a roller coaster? I personally try to avoid it because they make me kind of barfy. But if you've ever ridden on the very front seat of a roller coaster, you understand why people want to ride there. Because you are the first to see all of the action. You can see it all coming back at you. It's all right in your face. It's so exciting. Well, church accountant, your job is like that in the church. You are the first one to see where the church is at financially. You can see all the risks up ahead. You can see the dips. You can see the successes. You're the first one who gets to see it. Church bookkeeper, you're the first one who knows how much came in the offering plate. So if it's a banner week, you're going to that pastor excited. You get to be the first one to know. If you see that bill come through that you think, ugh, I'm not sure how payroll is going to fall after that, you're the first one. You get to see it before anybody else. You're in that seat. That is your role, to sit in that seat, to be the first one. But there's a funny thing about sitting first in a roller coaster. You don't actually have any control. Even if you see that there's a huge dip coming, there's no brake, there's no steering wheel. You're just stuck right there watching it come. And yeah, you will probably be screaming loudly to warn everybody behind you that there's a dip, but it'll be more like, ah, that'll be the warning. But there's nothing that you can do other than just shout the warning. And church bookkeeper, that is the role that you sit in. You get to see everything coming and happening first, but it's not actually your job to control how it all happens. It's your job to give the warning. It's your job to recognize what trends are down the road. It's your job to help them stay on the rail, to say that these are the lines we have to stay between. You can shout that, hey, this is how we stay on those rails. But you don't get to control it. That's not your role. So now, Pastor, here's the mistake that you might be making. You might be saying, I hope that I'm the guy with the gas. You are the guy with the gas. You're the guy that's sitting in the box that is making that roller coaster run down those tracks at whatever speed you want. And it's exciting to sit in the box and to just keep hitting the gas. Let that thing go as fast as you possibly can. But Pastor, you need to recognize that the person sitting in the front, while they may have their hair flown back and a terrified look in their eye, when they shout, danger ahead, it might not just be because they're scared. It might just be because they can see the tracks are out. And you can't see that the tracks are out because you're sitting back in the control house. And so when they shout the warning, the answer isn't, don't worry, I'll make it go faster, you'll have more fun. It is, wait, the tracks are out? And you're hitting the brakes then. So Pastor, you need to understand that a lot of time churches feel a little bit like Jesus and Judas, that they were on opposite sides. He was the money holder, Jesus was the guy in charge, and there was that tension there. That is not how it's supposed to be in a church between the accounting person and the pastor. They should be a team that work together. That the pastor is the one giving the mission. This is the way that we're going. This is how I want to get there. This is the vision that we have for the church. And it's the bookkeeper's job to sit in that very front seat and say, here's how we're going to stay on the rail. Don't forget to dip to the right. Don't forget to follow this rule. I'll make sure that there's money available. We can do this. It's the teamwork that makes that roller coaster so much fun and that makes the ride of ministry so exciting. But you both have to know how to work together to make that work. So in a quick recap, the things that you need, the mistakes that I see. First, don't make things so difficult, church bookkeeper. Be a little bit more lighthearted. Find a way to do it without maybe hitting without maybe getting that form filled out. Second, don't be so easy. Stand up for yourself and make sure that you protect yourself. The things that you can't do them not because you're being difficult, but because you're protecting yourself and you're protecting the church. All right, then my bonus one for the pastor. Pastor, protect your bookkeeper. Do the job, review the reports, read the papers, sign off on the checks, look at the expense reports. That's your job. Third, do the bank reconciliation, and not just because it makes me happy, because it'll make you happy too. Remember, it's your Swiss Army knife. It's accomplishing all of those little things just by doing it every month. And finally, fourth, for pastor and for church bookkeeper, know your role. Find a way that you can work together so that you can see the ministry that God has given that church happen without tension, with beauty and motion as you go down that roller coaster together. So thanks so much.